Greetings friends, it's me, Wayman29. This is a video going out to Lazarus and Jack. Hey Jack, excellent bringing Lazarus into the conversation. It's great that kids are getting into these types of debates and thinking about these sorts of things at a young age. It's pretty important. You're talking about the criteria for evidence. My criteria for evidence is, I don't know. I guess I'm the kind of guy who would go to a party, listen to all these groups of people talk, and sit in a corner and think about it and observe what's happening. So I kind of taken myself and put myself to the outside, and I'm kind of observer. So what I have observed is the criteria for evidence constantly changes as people develop into different things and move into different periods of their lives, whatever would make that change. So as the criteria change, it's interesting. You have people change denominations. You have all these different denominations. You have confessions in religious literature. And, there's a whole group of things that people use as evidence of their beliefs, and even evidence of, especially what I find interesting, is the categories of like, what do they call that? Where people believe in UFOs and Bigfoot and abominable snowman. There's some pretty interesting videos on that. Discovery ran some, History Channel runs some interesting stuff. But I guess the thing is, you get somebody like Thomas. Thomas is, in the New Testament, Thomas's criteria for evidence was totally different than the rest of the apostles. And he was kind of viewed as, a negative kind of thing. But he was able to touch Christ in the most intimate way, just because he was asking questions, However, sometimes there's a danger to all this too, when you're collecting evidences, because people who are giving you the information may be giving you a romanticized view of the world and history based on the belief system that you're leaning towards, denomination you're leaning towards. All that is filtered through the worldview and worldview of history, and so it's highly romanticized. And you find this happening with every belief system. The history is romanticized, events are romanticized to fit the romanticized idea of how they view themselves in the world, how they view their deities, and how they practice their rituals, and where they believe they will go into the afterlife. So sometimes these romanticized ideas are enforced. So, for example, you go up to whoever, hey, my evidence criteria has changed, and I don't want to be a part of your religious group anymore. So, see you later. Because these evidences here don't satisfy me as being evidences. So sometimes you will get your head cut off, you will get excommunicated, you will get shunned for that. And I think that the problem is there's no established, and there never will be, there's no established way of gaining these evidences, because they're so diverse and they're so separate from one another. Cultural differences, many different things. Why? Because people will always be people, and people are different from one another, so they view the world in different ways. And so they will allow as evidences different things for different ways. So I guess for me personally, I'm an observer. Somebody comes running up to me and would tell me their evidences. I would read a little bit about it and say, that's pretty interesting, and leave it at that. I might think that they're a little bit over the edge sometimes. Sometimes it might make sense. Sometimes I can draw comparisons with archaeology and say, hey, yeah, this is pretty interesting because this was found, that supports those kinds of ideas. However, down the road, interpretations of even archaeology change, and how it was viewed. You get a lot of this stuff, especially, with Bible archaeology and things like that. So it's in a constant flux. And a lot of time, and this is what bothers me, is that people, because you have the criteria being in a constant flux, those within the belief systems and in these groups do not allow room for change and constant flux. So they say we have all these evidences, but they may be outdated with the rest of the evidence, or what's accepted as the evidence at that time, in order to hold on to their belief system or ideas. So it ends up being, rather than having evidences, it also ends up being an act of self-preservation for a group. So I guess my question is, when do we change the evidences? Every person is going to have his own criteria on what he changes. What are the set criteria for evidences? Every belief system has its own. You look at some of the confessions, as I said before. Out of almost every belief system has confessionals, not confessionals, or doctrinal statements, things like that. And so there's no unified idea of that. However, in science, there is somewhat a unified idea. It's a scientific method. I can even use that as accepting evidences for a belief system, and I can bounce that off from, and I do it quite a bit. People making hypotheses about how things happen. People out of belief system making hypotheses about how things happen. You test a hypothesis and see where it goes from there. So, take care, Jack, and interesting conversation. And I've been doing a series on hell in ancient literature, and I'm going to continue to do that. I just came on to say hi. So I've been doing okay. Jack, I think we both need to shave. So take care. Excellent job, Lazarus. That's a pretty interesting name. So I'm all into, especially now doing the hell thing, resurrection theology and all that stuff. So take care, friends, and remember, if everybody's thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking.